Welcome to the Film Mechanics with Deri Tyton Podcast. What is the process of screenwriting? It is where you start your process of developing your story, developing your character, developing your arcs, knowing your themes. What is the major dramatic question, and all of those wonderful things that go into, and there's so much more. What's the story engine? What I wanted to do today was I wanted to kind of talk to you about what it would take in order for that process to start. Like, how do we begin that process? In beginning that process, it's very important to understand that everyone has a story, right? Like, everyone has that one story or those stories or those scenarios or those moments where you're like really engaged with what is going on in terms of as a scene, as something that you've heard, something that's a beautiful moment. And you're thinking to yourself, like, that would make a dope story. That would be so awesome. But what we don't know is that a lot of times that does not make the best story. What makes the best story is being able to have a beginning, middle, and an end. Of course, that's an act 1, act 2, act 3, maybe a act 4, act 5, maybe a teaser, a cold opening, maybe a tag out. I mean, it depends on the kind of story that you want to tell. What is that? Right? What's the story? So I always start my process off with 10 words or less. Like, I literally want to say, this is my story in 10 words or less. Like, I'll give you an example. In fact, I'll give you a couple. Let's take the movie Rush Hour, right? And let's say I was talking about Rush Hour in the sense that, okay, how would I tell my story in 10 words or less? It would go, a Chinese detective seeks to find a friend's daughter. 9 words, right? Roughly 9-10 words. If I said poetic justice, the film Poetic Justice, a South Central girl who writes poetry to overcome depression. That's what the film is about. If I wanted to talk about the movie Dreamgirls, and I wanted to make that 10 words or less, a Detroit girl singing group rise to fame. It doesn't really sound like much to you, but to me, that's the best place to begin. Because what it's going to do is going to give me the idea that if I could tell my story in 10 words or less, as bland as it may sound, as vanilla as it may sound, as simple as it may sound, at least I know my story. But a lot of times, whenever you're talking about your story, you want to plot your story. You want to be able to tell that story in like 99 words or 5 minutes. And if I was to say, well, tell me, somebody asks you, what is your story about? And you say, well, my story is about a Chinese detective who meet this guy in LA who a police officer, and then they go on this journey to find, and they go to this massage bar, and let me tell you this part too. A lot of times that can become confusing because you have so many snapshots that's going on in your mind that you're literally trying to tell all the story. That's called plotting the story. What happened in the story? That's what you're telling me. What's happening in your story? The difference between a story and a plot is a story is what your story is about. The plot is what happens in your story. I'm constantly telling screenwriters it's okay to know what's going on in your story. It's okay to know what happens in your story. But what is not okay is that you're trying to tell your story in these large snapshots when you can just start simply. Tell me your story in about, let's say, 10 words or less. Now we need to find a perspective in which we want to tell this story from. That is the most important part, the perspective, the point of view. Because point of view is going to have your audience follow that particular character along this journey. It's going to give us some insightfulness of what the writer is saying through their character. You may not feel that that's how you write, but that's how everyone writes. We have an idea of what should happen, what can happen, what will happen, and we want to say, hey, this character is going to tell the world about what is going on. This character is going to tell the audience about how I feel about the world. Man, listen, you're writing from the writer's point of view. You're giving it to a character, and that character will go out into the world and tell the audience how you feel or what you think or what you have ideas about. Even as an antagonist, that antagonist can have an opposite viewpoint. So let's go, if we go back to the same example of Rush Hour, like we know that Rush Hour is told from the point of view of a Chinese detective. We know that Poetic Justice is told from the point of view of Justice, the main character. We know in the movie Dreamgirls, that's told from the point of view of Effie, who's substantially very important to the story, even though there are moments where we don't even see her. But it is her story that we connect with the best. We connect with the most. Even in those examples that I'm discussing, even though we are experiencing the story through the eyes of the protagonist, it must be understood that every film has a major dramatic question. The major dramatic question is where you answer the question of the film. What do Deri mean by that? In Rush Hour, a Chinese detective seeks to find a friend's daughter. Major dramatic question. Will he save the daughter? Poetic Justice, the story. A South Central girl who writes poetry to overcome depression. The major dramatic question would be, will Justice ever find love again? In Dreamgirls, and I'm just giving you these examples because I want you to know how this worked. A Detroit girl singing group rise to fame. Will the Dreamgirls make it together? That's the major dramatic question. And throughout a whole film, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, 100 pages, whatever you have, you're going to answer that question. It doesn't matter if they make it together. It doesn't matter if he saves the girl. It doesn't matter if she ever finds love again. Your goal as a screenwriter is to answer the question the best that you can. As we embark on this journey as screenwriters, it is very important that we understand that every screenplay must have conflict. One of the most important parts about having conflict is that we must draw on the emotions of the characters, draw on the emotions of the setting, draw on the emotions of the story, draw on the emotions of the screenwriter. In my workbook, in the film mechanics screenwriting workbook, I always mention as a writer, you must write to emote, emote, emote. Emoting will also help every scene, every arc, and every story. And you really want to get deep into the emotional component of your story because you want your audience to take this journey with you. That's why it's very important that everyone who has a story, that has a character that wants to live throughout the journey of that story, you want us to emotionally be engaged with that character. We want to see how they respond to conflict. Do not take for granted at any moment. Please do not take for granted at any moment. What I'm saying is going to make your story simple and effective just by doing these three things. The process does not only begin with these three things, but the process has unlimited components in order for you to understand your story before you go into the screenplay. I'm creating this podcast to help so many people who have an idea, start in the screenplay, and by page 22 or 44 or 57 or 73, they're done. They don't even know where it begins. And if you read it, I guarantee you it wouldn't look like anything that you will be able to watch on a large screen, on a small screen, or you will even be able to be interested in. Don't always think about your audience, because what is important is to think about the story that you're writing first. 10 words or less. What is your story about? What's the point of view that you're taking? And what's the major dramatic question you're trying to answer? Those are the first 3 steps you should take in your screenwriting process. And those steps are in my workbook, the Film Mechanic Screenwriting Workbook, a screenwriting process that sells. I hope you had a wonderful time listening to me. In essence, what I'm saying is, as we begin this process, always remember, writing is a spiritual journey. Thanks for coming to the Film Mechanics with Deri Tyton Podcast. We appreciate your support. Be sure to leave a review and a comment and share with your closest screenwriting friends. Stop by www.derityton.com for the Film Mechanics Screenwriting Workbook, and we'll see you next episode. Have an awesome day. Peace.